Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Chee-Tash. My name is Chris, and today we're going to be continuing along the book Atomic Habits by James Clear. Today, talking about chapter 17, how to get an accountability partner that can change everything. If you guys remember last time, we talked about habit tracking and how habit tracking kind of combines different laws of habit making, those 4 laws of atomic habits. And we talked about how habit tracking can make things obvious, it makes things very attractive, and it can make things very satisfying. This can be simply put into implementation by taking a calendar and crossing off days on the calendar whenever you perform that specific habit that you're trying to implement into your life. So hey, you want to make it a habit that, I want to read 20 pages every day. Well, every time you finish 20 pages, you cross off an X or you put a check mark on that day in the calendar. And then it motivates you and it holds you accountable to keep that consistency going. So we talked about that last time, never breaking the chain, how to stay consistent. What do you do when you do miss a day, because we're not all perfect. We talked about that last time. Pretty cool chapter and stuff that I've tried to implement in different times of my life. I remember Jerry Seinfeld talking about that, never breaking the chain, that he uses a calendar to mark days off on every time he works on his material or jokes, etc. He marks an X on the calendar. So pretty cool chapter. Today we're going to be continuing along, and I think it's actually the final chapter of this 4th law of atomic habits, which again is making it satisfying. But today we're going to be kind of talking about how to make it unsatisfying, because each of these laws has an inverse. So if you don't want to do habits, like say you don't want to smoke anymore, you have to invert these laws. So you have to make it unsatisfying or not savory. So we're going to kind of get into that a little bit here. And we're going to start off, like James does every chapter, with a little bit of an anecdote about this gentleman, Roger Fisher, who was a World War II pilot and also a graduate of Harvard Law School. And after his career, or his time at university, at college, he started this project called the Harvard Negotiation Project that attempted to work with world leaders. It attempted peace resolutions, study in conflict management, how to deal with hostage crises, etc., etc., etc. And he also, with this project, worked to negate or handle the threat of nuclear war and negate the escalation of nuclear war. So how did he exactly do this? Well, he thought of an idea that somebody should put the codes to the nuclear warheads or the nuclear weapons in a capsule and put that next to a person's heart. So you volunteer somebody to follow around the president and have this person have the capsule, surgically embedded next to their heart. That's how I'm picturing it. And every time the president wants to use those weapons, they have to essentially kill that person to get to the codes. And people told this guy, Roger, that's kind of crazy. Why would you do that? The president would have to kill somebody. Like, that's not cool. But Roger, that's exactly the point that Roger was trying to get at, was, yes, you need to show the president that his action of nuclear war shouldn't be taken lightly, and that there's a consequence to it. People will die. And you need to have that threat of people's lives being taken right there at your doorstep. So it brings the reality of ending a person's life right in front of you, because these weapons, or whatever weapons you use, it's always somewhere farther away where you don't really see the repercussions of it. But if you have to end somebody's life right in front of you in order to use these weapons far away, then you start to get the gravity of it. Then it kind of actually makes it a little bit unsatisfying to use the weapons, because you don't want to harm this person that has the codes embedded next to their heart. So it kind of makes you think twice a little bit. And that's kind of the whole point that James talks about in this chapter, which, by the way, a very short chapter, by the way. But he talks about how pain is a great teacher. And so much of life is just, it's not like going after positive things. It's just trying to avoid the bad things. So if we know that, and we know that we want to avoid bad things, we can use that to our advantage when trying to form positive habits and trying to get rid of negative ones. We can get rid of the negative ones by associating them with something unsatisfying. So punish yourself, punishment right after a bad habit. And there's a way to do this that we're going to talk about in the next slide, but when you enact a punishment after doing a bad habit, like let's say you have a punishment for every time you go back to and you smoke a cigarette, right? You lose discipline and you smoke a cigarette, right? The punishment must match the strength of the behavior. So if you're trying to be healthier, you're trying to lose weight, you're trying to eat right, the cost of being lazy must be greater than the cost of the exercise. So if you do end up eating like McDonald's, then the cost that you put on yourself for eating that McDonald's must be greater than the cost of the exercise. Because you need to make it so that you won't do that bad habit anymore. Maybe just as an example, maybe you have an accountability partner and every time you eat that McDonald's, you have to pay the accountability partner $100, which I know it's super steep, right? You might as well just exercise for free, like go out for a run or do some push-ups or sit-ups at your house, right? And maybe that's a little bit like extreme, like $100, geez, that's a lot, but it needs to be something substantial to the point where maybe it happens once. Maybe you cave and you eat that Big Mac with cheese or that fish fillet and some fries and a Diet Coke, and you have to pay your accountability partner $100, and then you realize, geez, that's a lot of money. Never want to do that again. So the punishment has to fit the crime, like they say, at least here in America. The more immediate the consequence, the more likely it is to influence the individual behavior. So you can't wait to punish yourself, right? You can't say, oh, okay, I'll pay you some other time. That's the point of having like an accountability partner, is that they're there to hold you accountable right away so that the effect is immediate. Kind of like how we talked about a few chapters ago on how living in a world where so many things are delayed, sometimes you need like an instant gratification moment from your habits, because you're not going to see the effects of them for a long time, right? You're not going to see the effects of piling up your 401k for a long time, but if you treat yourself every time you contribute to your 401k, hey, you have like a few pieces of dark chocolate, okay, it makes it satisfying. Here, we're trying to do the opposite. So the one way to do that is through something called a habit contract. So as an example, kind of where this stems from, James talks about how the first seatbelt laws were enacted in December of 1984, and it was enacted in New York. At the time, only 14% of people were using seatbelts in America. And then within 5 years, over half the nation had seatbelt laws. Today, most states, 49 of the 50, at least at the time of writing of the book, have seatbelt laws. And in 2016, over 88% of Americans were wearing seatbelts. So you have between 1984 and 2016, like a complete reversal of this situation in like, what is that? That's like 30-ish years. So what happens? Well, essentially laws are enacted and a social contract, James says, is imposed to then have everybody agree to act in a certain way. The social contract or the laws hold people accountable, and then you get, tickets for and fines for not wearing your seatbelt when you're driving a car. This is the social contract that ends up happening. And then guess what? Every time you go in the car, it's like automatic now. It's just been ingrained in our lives, at least here in America. As soon as you get in the car, you put on your seatbelt. And it's kind of crazy to me that people didn't used to wear seatbelts. So James says you can use something similar called a habit contract. Now, the habit contract is essentially like you're creating your own law for your own life. You state the commitment to the habit that you want to enact, or maybe you state your commitment to the habit, to staying away from a habit that you don't want to enact, right? And then you state your punishment every time you do that certain habit. And then you find people, your accountability partners, to sign off on that contract with you so that they can hold you accountable as well as you hold yourself accountable. So this actually needs to be, maybe it doesn't need to be, but it's highly recommended that this is actually something that you write down. And you write down into existence, you actually draft it and you sign it. Because, and he gives an anecdote in the book of somebody who did this. Let me see if I can find the name. It was this guy, Brian Harris, entrepreneur from Nashville, Tennessee. He just went above and beyond, and he actually drafted like an actual contract, because it makes it serious. It makes it definitely feel like this is legitimate. Like, I am sticking to this. I'm going to own this, and I'm not going to back down. Because, if you sign a contract in real life, you have to honor it, right? Well, why would it be anything different here with your habits is kind of the main point that James is getting at. You want this to feel serious, like you are, just signing up for car payments or a mortgage, etc. So you have this contract. Every time, you fall back and do the habit that you're not supposed to be doing, right? You have to enact the punishment set in that document, and you have people there who sign the document that are going to uphold that for you. So they're going to ensure that your punishment is upheld, whatever that punishment is, a fine, maybe you have to pay the person money, you have to work out twice. You have to do 2 workouts the next day, etc. Whatever it is. And then essentially, once you reach certain goals, you upgrade the contract, and you upgrade the consequences to it too. To not do certain habits makes those habits painful in the moment. So what did I mean here when I said this? To not do certain habits to not do certain habits, you have to make those habits painful in the moment. So, yes. Which means, you have to enact a punishment. It's kind of what we've been saying throughout this whole entire presentation here so far. How do you make them painful? Well, again, it's got to be something that's greater than if you were to just do the habit, right? It's got to be something to where you just say, hey, I should have exercised. Like the example we were talking about earlier. So yes, I'm going to pay a fine of $100 if I eat that cheeseburger from McDonald's. And then that's going to make you say, yes, I should have just exercised. And again, to have somebody there with you too, it just makes it harder to give up. And it's kind of goes a couple different ways. You don't want to let the other person down. You don't want to come across as a fraud to another person's eyes, because it would be easy if you just drafted a contract, a habit contract for yourself, but nobody was there to sign it. Nobody was there to witness it. So when you don't do those habits, or when you fall back into doing bad habits, well, then there's nobody else there. You just look bad to yourself, and you can kind of get away with it. You can kind of look the other way. But if there's other people there that will hold you accountable, that will hold you accountable, then you're not going to be able to get away with things. But you're also not going to want to fail in front of other people, because you're not going to want to seen as somebody who's lesser than, or somebody who can't do something. Right? We kind of live off of those relationships with other people. We're creatures of tribes, right? And we don't want to be seen as somebody who would be a liability to a tribe when all is said and done. So having that person there with you to sign that habit contract or be a witness to that contract is huge, is what James gets at in this chapter. So to summarize, basically, if you don't want to do certain habits, you have to invert the fourth law. So you have to make things unsatisfying for yourself. You have to make it so you're less likely to repeat those bad habits. And there's ways to do this. You can have an accountability partner that can enact the immediate cost of an inaction. They're going to be the ones that say, hey, okay, so you had that cigarette when you wanted to quit smoking. Well, okay, you got to pay up the fine. Or, okay, no TV for tonight, no video games for tonight. So that it makes you not want to let others down, and you don't want to be seen as somebody who's weak in the minds of other people. Also, a habit contract, so that you can tack on the additional cost of inaction or bad habits. You can, again, hold yourself accountable, and you can put down in writing what happens. So you can make it obvious, right? You can make it obvious when you do something that is not, or when you do the bad habit and it's spelled out in the contract. Well, there's no going back. There's no fighting it, basically. You can't get out of it. So you can use accountability partners. You can use habit contracts to keep you on track. And essentially, just knowing when others are watching is very, very powerful. If you have people like a team around you, family, friends that are keeping track of your habits with you, or maybe they're participating with you as well, you keep each other accountable, and the threat of other people seeing you fail is just a very, very powerful thing. I know it sounds negative to fail, but it's a huge motivator. We don't want to fail. We want to succeed. So that is all about habit contracts. That is all about making things satisfying. And that is it for chapter 17 and actually the fourth law. Thank you guys very much for listening and making it this far. We only have a few chapters left. We've actually finished with the core of the book, and then the next section here is advanced tactics on how to go from being merely good to being truly great. So interested to see what other tidbits James has to share in that section. So we'll be back next time, but we are very close to finishing the book. So thank you guys very much for sticking around. Let me know if you have any questions. Please check out the podcast. We had a brand new interview clip dropped this week of Dr. Michael Barkin, and we'll have some more clips dropping the next several weeks from that interview. So thank you guys very much for listening. My name is Chris. This has been Chee-Tash. Take care, everybody.